Hi there. Thanks for tuning into the Canadian Constitution Foundation's Freedom Update. Today was the fourth day of hearings in the Public Order Emergency Commission, also known as the Rouleau Commission. This is the legally required public inquiry into the federal government's first ever invocation of the Emergencies Act, which was in response to the 2022 Freedom Convoy. The Commission is examining and assessing the basis for the government's decision to declare an emergency. In this video, I'll give you a quick summary of some of the things that stood out to me in day 4 of these historic hearings. During these hearings today, there were 2 witnesses, outgoing Mayor Jim Watson and Kim Ayotte, the General Manager for Emergency and Protective Services for Ottawa. I can't wait to tell you all about it. So today, the Rouleau Commission heard from these 2 witnesses, Jim Watson and Kim Ayotte. But first, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the Litigation Director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, which is a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases, and I'm trying to do regular video updates about what happens at the Emergencies Act inquiry hearings. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. And because we're monetized, we actually get a little bit of ad revenue, which helps us pay for our legal fees, which are really expensive to participate in this commission. Also, please remember that these videos are not legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So before getting into what happened in today, day 4, I want you to keep in mind that this is just my summary of some of the key parts of the full day of hearings that stood out to me as especially interesting and worth sharing. This is not a complete summary of everything that happened, and also it's not necessarily my opinion of the evidence that's being given in the testimony, unless I tell you it is my opinion, which I will do at some point. This is also just my best recollection based on my observations and notes. If you want every detail, I recommend watching the hearings themselves. They are live streamed every day, or you can also read the transcripts on the Commission website. So today was actually the first day that we cross-examined a witness, and we cross-examined Mayor Watson. We are most interested in the issue of whether or not there were any other laws available to the government that could have been used to address the ongoing and entrenched protests in Ottawa. If there were some other laws that were available, that means that the high threshold to invoke the act was not met because those other laws should have been used. So our questions to Mayor Watson were aimed at that core issue. Now I'm going to show you the clip of our cross-examination.
Thank you. Mayor Watson, can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Sujit Chaudhry. I'm counsel for the CCF. We just have a few minutes, and I know it's been a long day for you, so I have a number of quick factual questions I hope you can answer.
Sure.
So did you ever request Prime Minister Trudeau to invoke the Emergencies Act?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever request Minister Mendocino to invoke the Emergencies Act?
No.
Did you request Minister Blair to invoke the Emergencies Act?
No, I can save you. I didn't ask anyone to invoke the Emergencies Act because at the time I did not know what was contained in the Emergencies Act.
At the time, were you familiar with what was contained in Ontario's Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act?
I was given a copy of it and I read it, but I can't recall the specifics of it at this point, but I was certainly shown it, and was a copy of the documentation was sent to my office from the provincial government.
Did you ever discuss the act? Pardon me, sir.
Yeah, no, with the Premier?
Yeah, or with the Solicitor General?
No.
So you never requested that the Premier declare an emergency under that act?
No, my preoccupation with the Premier was getting resources, namely police resources and compensation for businesses and individuals that were affected negatively as a result of the occupation. Those were the 2 areas that I spent most of my time with the Premier, and to his credit, he delivered, along with the Prime Minister, funding for compensation for the small businesses in those zones that were adversely affected.
Mayor Watson, are you aware that under that law, once the Premier declares an emergency, the Premier can issue an order to regulate or prohibit travel to, or movement to, from, or within any specified area?
Well, I'm at a disadvantage because I don't have a copy of it, but if you're telling me that's in the Act, I have no reason to not believe you.
Or that the Premier can issue an order to evacuate individuals or remove personal property from any specified area?
Again, I'm going to take you at your word that that is the case, but I don't have a copy of the Act or the proclamation in front of me, but I did read it when it did come in several months ago.
Okay, good. Mayor Watson, those conclude my questions. Commissioner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The province certainly did invoke a state of emergency, which gave them all kinds of additional powers that we argue could have been used to address these protests. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about some of the other testimony today that stood out to me. This summary is going to be a little bit shorter than yesterday's because I'm actually working while listening to these hearings. I'm editing a book that we are releasing on Friday. I'm doing way too much all at once. But if you want to support us, you can sign up for a free early bird copy of that book at the ccf.ca/freedom through federalism. This is a book about how our Constitution and the division of powers can be used to constrain government overreach, to protect liberty, including by limiting the centralizing power of the federal government. The book is free, so sign up and get a free copy. Okay, sorry for the tangent. Here are the things that stood out to me in Mayor Watson's evidence. First, he was asked about that letter from the Hotel Association warning that the truckers were planning to stay in Ottawa for an extended period and were getting a lot of rooms. I summarized that letter in yesterday's video, and Mayor Watson was asked about it. And he said that most of the people at the city and the police didn't take the issue seriously. They didn't take the truckers seriously, that they were booking 11,000 rooms, because he said that at that point, those rooms hadn't been booked. He was also asked about the city's planning in advance of the convoy arrival, and he testified that he didn't discuss with Chief Slowly what would happen if the truckers stayed longer than just a few days. He also testified that the first time he asked for more resources, it was to the Prime Minister. He asked the Prime Minister for more resources directly, and that was on January 31st. He was also questioned about a discussion around appointing a mediator to work with the protesters, but he testified that the federal government was against it and they opposed the use of a mediator, and he testified that he did not know why. Mayor Watson also testified that Chief Slowly made a request for 1,800 officers, including a very detailed chart with how many people he needed and what types. He said that Chief Slowly had put together a very thorough and detailed ask for additional support. Mayor Watson also testified that at the end of the day, there were no deaths or serious injuries arising out of the protests. And he was also questioned at length about a direct dialogue with the Prime Minister, who he was in direct communication with. One thing that stood out to me was that Watson and the Prime Minister discussed Watson's view, to quote, that Premier Ford was hiding from his responsibility for political reasons. A common theme, again today, like yesterday, was how long it took and the lack of commitment to resources from other levels of government. Mayor Watson admitted that the extended protests were a failure at all levels of government and that all levels of government did not act fast enough. One detail that came up today that was pretty concerning was testimony around the police having arrested a man who Watson said had come to Ottawa from New Brunswick with, to quote Watson, guns in his trunk with the intention to shoot Watson. Now, this is obviously extremely disturbing, and I'm grateful to the police that they have arrested this person. Watson was also very insistent that the city needed the Emergencies Act, although he said he didn't know the act even existed before it was invoked. Today was also the first time I noticed Commissioner Rouleau intervene and ask the witnesses some of his own questions. First, he asked Mayor Watson about Watson's statement that, to quote, the feds needed to do their duty. He asked Mayor Watson, how do you view the feds' role? Do they have an equal role with the province? And this part really stood out to me. Mayor Watson answered by saying that Ottawa is a little bit different from other cities. The protesters, he testified, were focused on the federal mandate on borders and masks on planes. Mayor Watson testified that he was equally frustrated by both levels of government, the feds and the province, with his constant prodding to take the situation as a more urgent matter. He said that while maybe they're no different from any other city under the Municipal Act, they do have a special responsibility, he testified, as the nation's capital. And he testified that they could not do this alone and that their back was against a wall. Now, here's my opinion. Ottawa is not special constitutionally. It is absolutely no different from any other city under our Constitution. Now, the RCMP may have more officers there, which actually could have made cooperation more convenient and efficient. But hey, what do you know? Government didn't manage it well. That, however, is not the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act. I also want to turn back to that concerning testimony that the mayor was threatened. I am so grateful to police for doing their job and arresting the person who had made these threats. It sounds like the law was used effectively to deal with that situation, which is great. It also speaks a bit to that key question. This individual was arrested using ordinary police powers under existing law. Next, the commission called Kim Ayotte, the general manager for emergency and protective services for Ottawa. I was actually surprised that Mr. Ayotte was called because the schedule that I saw did not show him on the list for today, showed him on the list for tomorrow. Mr. Ayotte gave some testimony about the emergency services in the city, including how bylaw officers did an excellent job, his words, keeping emergency lanes open. He also talked about how bylaw had been told not to issue tickets. Now, there is some dispute over this, which I addressed in yesterday's video, so you can check that out. Mr. Ayotte testified that this being told not to issue tickets, that created a lot of morale problems for bylaw because bylaw wanted to do their job. And he says that they're making up for it now by enforcing parking tickets eagerly during other protests like Rolling Thunder. So I guess if you're in Ottawa anytime soon, be careful where you park because the meter maids are really on a tear. When Mr. Ayotte was questioned by counsel for the protesters, he confirmed that about 3,000 tickets were issued, and when those tickets were issued, no officer was assaulted in the process of those tickets being issued. He also confirmed on cross-examination that the negotiated deal to move the trucks onto Wellington, that deal that had been made between the city and the protesters, it didn't go through because the police stopped it. Although he said that the protest group didn't control all of the protesters. Convoy counsel put it to him that the agreement was stopped because the police wouldn't let them move, and Mr. Ayotte said to answer that, counsel will need to speak to Staff Sergeant Drummond. Mr. Ayotte was also questioned about the city's access to heavy vehicle tow trucks. This also came up yesterday. He was asked about the 2 tow trucks that OC Transpo owns. That is the municipal bus service in Ottawa. And he said that those tow trucks were not used because of what he described were union concerns and because they needed the trucks for OC Transpo buses. So make of that what you will. There was also a question from Commissioner Rouleau to Mr. Ayotte, and this one was about an incident that came up yesterday, that was described yesterday, where the Chateau Laurier, a hotel in downtown Ottawa, had a broken fire sprinkler, and they'd said that fire services couldn't get in. Although it turned out on cross-examination that the fire services were able to get to the Chateau Laurier. Now, Mr. Ayotte was asked about this, and he confirmed that Ottawa Fire Services had dispatched 4 trucks to the Chateau Laurier for this incident. It was not an actual emergency, it was a broken sprinkler. He was asked by Commissioner Rouleau if 4 trucks is normal or less for a call to a place like Chateau Laurier. And Mr. Ayotte confirmed that this was normal for a broken sprinkler. Commissioner Rouleau asked, what if there was a real fire? Well, if there was actually a real fire, Mr. Ayotte said there would be 8 or 9 rigs of fire trucks. Mr. Ayotte said that access in that case for 8 or 9 rigs would have been limited. He said that the Chateau Laurier had portrayed it like, oh my gosh, this was a big problem. They couldn't get any trucks in at all, but they actually could, although it was not the full 8 to 9 rigs. Commissioner Rouleau then asked about other streets that were completely blocked. He gave an example of Kent Street, and Mr. Ayotte testified that that was a problem and that they were lucky there had been no fire. Another thing that stood out to me was the cross-examination of Mr. Ayotte about how CHIO, the Ottawa Children's Hospital, had received a false bomb threat. This came up on cross-examination by the Government of Canada. Mr. Ayotte was asked if there was any evidence that the bomb threat was connected to the protesters, and he said no, but the city had been receiving higher than normal 911 calls, and they suspected it was related. Obviously, this is also terrible, but I want everyone to keep in mind that with all of this testimony, the question is whether there are existing laws to deal with this, including the criminal code, including emergency powers that the province could exercise under their own declared state of emergency, which had actually been declared. And it's our position at the Canadian Constitution Foundation was yes, that existing laws could address this situation, including these troubling incidents. And if that's the case, the Federal Emergencies Act was not justified. Remember, this is an extraordinary law that allows the government to create new criminal laws, basically by edict. This is not how a sophisticated democracy acts. I hope this summary has been useful and informative. I'm going to do my best to keep up with posting the video summaries of the hearings, but I may start combining a few days into one video so that I don't burn out. If you value the summaries, please leave a comment below, because to be honest, it's a lot of work to make these videos, so I want to know that you're actually watching them and enjoy them. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to this channel by clicking the subscribe button below, and by subscribing to our email freedom updates at theccf.ca/freedom updates. I also want to thank all of you who are helping us to participate in this inquiry by donating to support our legal fees, which, as I've said, are really expensive. So if you want to support our work and our participation in this inquiry, I would so appreciate it if you could make a donation at theccf.ca/donate. If you can't, I get it. Inflation, times are really bad. But just watching this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing also helps because our channel is monetized. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.